Is it worth us looking through this first?
Right, okay, so this is recording then. So Croeso, welcome to the induction session for this module. So this PowerPoint is very much a national one that's been shared rather than a Swansea specific one. But just as a quick welcome then, so most of these people on screen you'll have seen previously. So these will be the different tutors across the unis that you'll meet on the two national conferences. So Laura and Megan you met previously on the Inclusive Classroom Practice module. However, you will also meet Rhiannon, who is the national lead for the ALN pathway, who's based at Cardiff Met. Laura, as you said, you've met, is based up in Wrexham. Nana is based at Trinity in Carmarthen. Carmel is at University of South Wales in Newport. Fliss is up in Bangor. And then Anne, you haven't met yet, works with Rhiannon at Cardiff Met. So over the next couple of Saturdays, you will meet all of us. That's a really old photo of me with a double chin and no white hairs on them. So what are we going to look at today? So I'm not going to go through everything on this PowerPoint, but I'll talk about a few things. So realistically, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the module map. So in particular, some key dates. In particular, the dates of the national conferences. Now, you've all been to those before. They're going to follow the same format, but it's just worth going over that briefly. And then I'll mention a few things about the assignment for this one. And what I would say, the assignment for this module, when you first look at it, sounds quite complicated. However, when you start to break it down, I think is actually quite a nice one. And the feedback of the last few years has been generally positive, excuse me, in terms of this one. So realistically, the module has 4 core strands. The assignment has 4 parts to it. Each part relates to 1 core strand. So for the Inclusive Classroom Practice module you did last term, for example, there was almost an expectation that you had to wait until you got to the end of the module before you could do the assignment. This one, if you are so inclined, and if you are one of those really organised people that I'm not, then you can kind of work through it at different steps as you go through the module itself, rather than having to leave it until the end. Okay. So everything on the PowerPoint is bilingual. I'm not going to go through it in Welsh, if that's all right. I'll just go through it in English, but the Welsh medium stuff is up on there if you want to follow it up. So realistically then, this is the module map for this module. So a very tight turnaround in terms of national conferences for this one. So the module officially starts today. Our first national conference is coming up at the end of this week on Saturday. And then our second national conference is on Saturday, the 14th of March. Now, as they tend to do this term, both of those days do clash with Six Nations, if anyone is going back and forth to matches, for example. But I think at least the first national Saturday, if you are watching it on TV, then the match starts after this one. So we do tend to find that attendance dips a little bit in the afternoons on those match days. So realistically then, as I said, 4 core strands for this one. First 2 core strands we'll cover on Saturday. Second core strand, set of core strands we'll do on the second national conference. So on Saturday we'll be looking at core strand 1, the functions and responsibilities of the ALNCO, and in particular thinking a little bit about what impact the ALNCO role might have on a range of different stakeholders. So again, as normal, there'll be some kind of talky bits, there'll be some discussion bits, and the aim of the discussion bits realistically is to think about how these things are contextualized within your setting. Now, some people on the module will be the ALNCO in their setting, some people won't be. It doesn't really matter what role people are in, but it's thinking about that role as it's kind of set out in legislation and then thinking about what it looks like in practice. So if you've read any of the ESTIN reviews of the ALN transformation programme, for example, one of the key things they've talked about is maybe the ALNCO role is broader than what people were expecting. The workload linked to it is huge, and maybe the ALNCO is dealing with and having responsibility for a much wider range of learners than was initially envisioned. So that's what we'll be looking at to start off with on Saturday. So that's the first core strand. And then the second core strand is thinking about effective partnership working. Now, when we think about partnership working, there's all sorts of different terminology that's used in terms of that, all sorts of different ways that might work in practice. So again, what does effective partnership working mean? What does it look like? What does it look like within kind of an ALN, SEN context? And again, you will be able to kind of contextualize to your practice in your setting. So some people previously have gone, well, I'm a class teacher, therefore I don't really have any dealings with external agencies, for example, so I don't get involved that much with partnership working. But any of us working in an education setting, we work with wider range of colleagues within our settings, our learners as partners, our parents as partners, for example. So all sorts of ways that we can contextualize that. So those then are the first two core strands. That's what this Saturday we'll be looking at in a bit more detail. Now, obviously, the module only starts today. That gives you less than a week to look at anything on PebblePad. So anything you are able to take a very quick skim read through, brilliant. If you don't have time to look at anything before Saturday, don't worry about it. Please just turn up and it will all be fine. Okay. So once this Saturday is out of the way, then the next half of the module is looking at core strands 3 and core strands 4. So core strand 3 is looking at developing a strategic plan to implement appropriate interventions and strategies. So realistically, what we're kind of looking at here is that kind of graduated response to support. So thinking about how do you move from that kind of universal provision into strategies and interventions that maybe are a little bit more targeted, a little bit more tailored, and then perhaps more specifically tailored and individualized, linked to learner needs. So you may well have come across the response to intervention model previously, for example. So what we do as universal provision works for most learners most of the time. For those learners where it's not quite working for, what is that next level of support? What might that look like? What's the process of getting to that next level of support? And then how do we evaluate whether that support is working or not? So that's what that's looking at. I'll go through that in a little bit more detail later when I talk about the assignment. And then the final part of this assignment, this module then is looking at what do we mean by effective leadership and management of ALN. So often we use the terms leadership and management interchangeably. What is kind of the difference between them? What does that look like from an ALN perspective? What are the strategies, the skills, the experiences that an ALNCO might find useful in terms of conducting their role realistically is what this one is looking at. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going. So what does the ALNCO do within a setting? What impact might they have on staff, on pupils, on families? How might the ALNCO, as in addition to everyone working in a school, work in partnership to support effective inclusion for learners? Who else might be involved in that partnership working? What are some of the barriers and challenges to that? So thinking about different terminology or perspectives between professions, for example. So healthcare practitioners coming in to support within an education setting, there might be different terminology that we use, different time frames, for example, challenges in terms of kind of putting those PCP meetings in place. How do we kind of go through those different levels of support to meet learner need? So moving from that kind of universal provision to something that might be very specific and tailored for an individual learner. And what does that kind of process and journey look like? And then what do we mean by effective leadership and management? And what does that look like in an ALN capacity? And then thinking about skills, thinking about knowledge, thinking about experiences, as well as contextualizing within your setting what might be the barriers and challenges people might be facing. So that's kind of where we're going in terms of that. Does that seem okay as a very brief, broad outline? Fab. Okay, so we've seen this slide before, so I'm not going to pay much attention to that. We've also seen this slide before as well in terms of referencing. Now I can see the word Moodle is on this slide. Realistically, Moodle is another version of Canvas that some universities use. So all I would say in terms of referencing, the only thing we've got is a link to a Harvard referencing guide, which is the same one that everyone gets across all the unis. I'll show you again later on where that is. And what I would say in terms of referencing as part of academic writing for this module, on the assignment that you submitted previously, academic writing, including referencing, was worth 5% of the mark. For this module, it's worth 20%. So some very excited facial expressions just then. So it is a big chunk, and realistically, we will go through this in more detail, both nationally on the conferences, but also in our drop-in sessions as well. And what I would say in terms of referencing, a few key things realistically would be the kind of the breadth and depth of reading. So anything that's on PebblePad, if it's useful for your assignment, you are more than welcome to kind of use it as part of your referencing. But equally, there will be bits like previously where you are focusing on something that's more contextually specific to yourselves, then there would be the need to kind of find your own references to kind of those kind of things. Okay, so I will just throw the referencing thing at you for now, annoy you, stress you out, and then move on to the next bit. So national conferences, so you've been to these previously, so as I said, work in the same format, so again they'll be within the same time frame, 9:30 to 3:15. I had the link through for Saturday this morning, so I've popped it onto Canvas, and it's also on PLP as well. So the timetable for the day and the link is available. I will email it to everyone later on this week as well. And like we had with the last module, any of the resources that are available in advance, I will pop them both on Canvas and PLP. And then the recordings will go up on both, normally on the Monday after the conference. So this Saturday, then we're looking at Course Strand 1 and Course Strand 2, role of the ALN and partnership working. Fab. Okay, so any questions at this point? No, fab. Right. Three of you have met each other previously, so I'm not going to put you into breakout rooms and ask you to kind of get to know each other at the moment. What I would say, I have put a Padlet up onto Canvas on the induction week kind of page. So if you do want to kind of pop up a brief introduction to yourself on there, by all means do so. I know many of you, if not all of you, were in that WhatsApp group last term as well. So maybe worth setting up a new one for this module, or potentially adding people to it. There will be three.
Am I allowed to slip in at this point? I know me and Anthony are in the WhatsApp group, but I don't know if you are. Are you in our WhatsApp group? If you want to join, me and Anthony can get you added. It really helps.
Yeah, go on then if you wouldn't mind. Thanks.
Send us your number afterwards. Sorry.
Yeah. Should I pop it in the chat?
Yeah, do that. And me or Anthony
That's
will
a
add
good
you.
idea. Thank you. There are 3, I think, people who this is their first module, so wouldn't have been on the inclusive classroom practice one as well. So I'll try and encourage them to share their details on the Padlet, and then if you're able to add them to the WhatsApp group as well, that would be much appreciated, I'm sure. Okay, so the assignment itself then. So this is the key thing, I suppose, that we want to know about. What is it? So this one, it's called a patchwork text. I don't know why it's called that, but basically it's 4 separate chunks. One chunk links to each of the core strands. Okay, it's a 4,000 word equivalent assignment. 4 parts of it, each of them are 1,000 word equivalent. Although some of them you will see there is there's 2 written bits, there's an academic poster and there's a recording. So they are 1,000 words equivalent in some cases, rather than you've got to put 1,000 words onto the poster, for example. However, when you come to submit this, you will submit this as a single Word document. So even though it's 4 separate sections, please submit it all as one Word document. And what I would say for your presentation, which I'll talk about shortly, the easiest thing to do is to pop a hyperlink to it and just embed that in the Word document itself. Okay. When it comes to doing the poster, you may find you can do the poster within the Word document. Equally, people have done it where they've popped a hyperlink to that poster as well. Okay, and if you're not sure about hyperlinking and embedding and things like that, we will publish some guidance in terms of how to do that. All right, so what I would say, one single Word document, Canvas won't let people submit multiple chunks. So one person last year, for example, got into a bit of difficulty. They hadn't put it onto one document. They'd posted their presentation and then they were panicking because they couldn't upload the 3 other bits. So just one Word document with all the bits attached would be great. And as I said, we'll go through all of that again in terms of the logistics of that. So what are the core strands and what are the bits then? So the first core strand, thinking about the role of the ALN. Here you are going to be doing a video presentation. So for this one, realistically, the easiest thing to do is record yourself talking over a PowerPoint. This is an 8-minute long presentation. And you've got plus or minus 10% leeway in terms of the timings this time. So I think 10% of 8 minutes is 42 seconds roughly. So you've got roughly 7 minutes, 10 seconds to 8 minutes, 40 seconds is the parameters for your discussion. And you are allowed to have on your PowerPoint a kind of a single PowerPoint introduction cover type slide, up to 4 slides with information on it, and then a reference list slide at the end. So it's basically a title slide, 4 slides of information, or up to 4 slides of information, and then your 1 slide with references on. Okay, so what you're going to be asked to do for the presentation is basically talk through this, a critical evaluation of the specific functions and responsibilities of the ALN and impact upon stakeholders. And what I would say in terms of this, depending upon your role, there is no right way of doing it, but what people have tended to have done over the last few years is start off thinking about this from kind of a theoretical level or from a policy level. So when we look at the ALN code for Wales, it sets out that the ALN must do this, for example, and then start to contextualize that a little bit more within what it looks like in your setting. So some people are the ALN and they've been able to, talk about from a personal perspective. Some people aren't, and then they're kind of given more of a third person reflection upon what the ALN role looks like in their school. So basically, what is the ALN? What do they expect it to do? So we can take that from policy and legislation and then thinking about what that looks like in practice within your setting and thinking about what's going well, what are some of the barriers, what are some of the challenges. So not wanting to put words in anyone's mouth, for example, but thinking about the things people have talked about previously. So in the last couple of years, quite a few people mentioned, the ALN in their school was new to the role. So they were really enthusiastic, but they didn't really have the experience in terms of leading where they were going. Or other people talked about the fact, you know what, the ALN Co is trying really, really hard, but other staff in the setting are not on board and don't really follow the advice they're given. Or I'm the ALN Co, I tried really hard to make relationships with parents, but I find it difficult to engage with parents because. All right, so what's the role of the ALN Co? What does that look like? What does it look like in your setting? What's going well? What are some of the challenges that people face? All right, so 8 minutes in length. There's no expectation that you have to have 1,000 words on your PowerPoint. You can use visuals as well as text on there. Couple of key things in terms of your PowerPoint: you need to be visible and you need to be audible, obviously. So if you record it on PowerPoint, you just need to make sure that your camera is on, and you will be in a little thumbnail at the bottom corner of the screen normally. And then just check that your mic is on when you're talking as well. Now, in terms of this, part of the mark is kind of looking at, do you present in an engaging way? That's quite difficult to do on a recorded PowerPoint. So what I would say in terms of this is totally fine to have a script that you've written that you are going to talk through as you go along. But in terms of your script, kind of do it newsreader style. Every now and again, look up at the camera. So I know in the past, if people have only had a single screen, for example, they've taped the script to the screen and kind of looked at it whilst they were talking. Okay, so 1,000 word equivalent, 8-minute presentation, 4 slides plus a title one if you want one, plus a reference list. What is the ALN Co? What do they do? What does this look like in your setting? What's going well? What are the challenges and barriers they face? Does that kind of seem okay as a very initial start on that one?
Can I ask a stupid question?
Go for it.
So with 1,000 words, if the 1,000 words aren't on the screen, it's obviously like, because you're not going to put 1,000 words in the 6 slides here. So
No, so
it's
that's
just going
one
to be the
very
scope
much is,
kind of things.
yeah. So that would be an equivalent. So there's no expectation that your talky bit is 1,000 words in length either. So realistically, the what they're looking at, it's the 8 minutes is seen as being a
Just the
1,000
timing.
word equivalent.
Okay.
You know, in terms of the PowerPoint, again, there's no right or wrong way in terms of doing this. It's quite subjective what makes an attractive and readable PowerPoint. All I would say really is have that kind of balance between text and visuals. You know, as you know, you all know what you're doing with PowerPoints, but it's the 8 minutes that's more important. Okay, second one then is a self-evaluation. And the self-evaluation here could be, or it's meant to be based on you personally as a practitioner. However, you could also contextualize this as a self-evaluation where the self is your setting. Okay, so I've seen people do it both ways equally successfully. So what you're going to be asked to do here is to self-evaluate partnership working. So either thinking about you as a practitioner and partnership working, or partnership working within your setting more widely. Okay, now for this, you will find on Canvas and on PLP, and we will also introduce this in the conference on Saturday, there is a document on those things called the self-evaluation template. I'll show you where it is later on. Realistically, it's a template that's got, I think, 9 different statements on there in terms of partnership working. And basically what it asks you to do initially is to use that template as a starting point to think about what's going well, what's okay but could be improved, and basically what isn't going well at all. Okay, so In terms of the self-evaluation template, the template itself doesn't form part of the submission, although it can do if you want to. So what I would say, people in the past have added it to the submission. It doesn't count as part of the word count, and it doesn't get marked necessarily, but it's a nice visual in some cases for, this is my initial evaluation, this is what it looked like, and then you've got your 1,000 words underneath talking through what you've said. So basically your self-evaluation is thinking a little bit theoretically, what do we mean by partnership working, what are the different ways that that could be done. So we could be thinking about partnership working within department in a secondary school. We could be thinking about kind of cross-phase partnership working. We could be thinking about working with external practitioners. We could be thinking about cluster working in terms of ALN within your geographical setting, for example. So all sorts of different ways that you can contextualize partnership working. And then basically you're asked to think about what's going well and how do you know and why is that important? What's okay, but maybe could be tweaked a little bit. And what, if anything, in your setting isn't going well, or what, if anything, you haven't had experience of and therefore could be improved. Okay, so some people in the past, as I said, have kind of copied and pasted this template onto the document and just had it as a visual, and they've ticked the columns that they've evaluated their practice was in. Some people have used colour, so they've done a red, amber, green, for example, in terms of this. So they've got a bit of a visual representation as to what's going well or not. Equally, sometimes people have asked the question, do you know what, I think everything is going well and there isn't anything that needs to be improved. What do I write about then? So maybe the way to approach that is, to know what, maybe as a school or as a practitioner, everything we're doing is exemplary practice. So rather than thinking about what could be improved, maybe it's a case of how could that good practice be more widely shared. Equally, you might look at this and go, to know what, everything I do or everything in my setting is terrible and I've got nothing good to say about anything. You know, you can take it from that point of view as well, but realistically it's asking you to think about what's good, what's okay, what could be improved, and then to kind of discuss that. So the 1,000 words is linked to the discussion. You can put the template in if you want to, but you don't have to. I would say it's 50-50 really whether people do. If you do put it in, it'll only ever be there as a visual prompt, but sometimes it's nice to see it in terms of where people are coming from. Okay, and I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later on. So again, I know that's very brief, kind of throwing that at you. Does that seem okay for that one? I take it as that's a not awful. So, okay, so that's that bit. The third bit then, academic poster. So this is the one that people either really, really like or people get really, really stressed about. Okay, so a 1,000 word equivalent poster. So again, no expectation that you're going to have 1,000 words slapped onto a poster, where you are evaluating that graduated response to supporting learners. So it's kind of going through that, I suppose, wave 1, wave 2, wave 3 type of support. That support for everyone. You look at the response to intervention model, for example, it suggests what we do normally works for 90% of learners 90% of the time. What do we then put in place for those 10% of learners where it isn't quite working? For those learners that we do that with, how do we know that it's worked? And then we take that support away. Or if it still isn't working, what's that kind of next step up again in terms of support? So for this one, I would say you're going to be using quite a lot of visuals, colour potentially, part of this as well. But no expectation that 1,000 words is put on the poster itself. Okay. In terms of the poster itself, there are 2 ways people tend to do this. So one of them is to do it as a PowerPoint slide, and there is some guidance up on Canvas and PLP as to how you can turn a single PowerPoint slide into a poster, or some people tend to use Publisher on Microsoft, for example. So maybe other ways that you want to do it, those are the two most common ones that I would say people have done. In terms of that graduated response, again, different ways that you can contextualize this. So some people have looked at it as a specific area of need, for example. So taking dyslexia as an example. So for all learners within our setting, we have, as part of our universal provision, these things in place. For those dyslexic learners where maybe that isn't working, they might then move to that next step of support, which may be small group intervention in a classroom, where we deliver extra high frequency word spelling strategies, for example. For those learners where that's working, we evaluate that after 6 weeks, and if it's no longer needed, they go back down to universal provision. Or maybe for those learners where they still need that support, what we then do is move towards targeted one-to-one support, and we follow something like the Conquering Literacy Programme, for example. Okay, so just making up something very briefly there. So you could look at it as a very specific area of need. You could be working in the context of a specific primary school class. So you could here talk about, well, this is what's part of our universal provision for all the learners in the class. However, there are some learners who might need additional support for social emotional well-being challenges. And there are other learners who might need support in terms of behaviour. There are other learners in the class who might need support for speech and language difficulties. And then you could kind of follow those different class journeys through your diagram. It is possible that you do it for a specific learner. So maybe you have worked with a learner who's gone right through that different journey in terms of strategies. Or you can talk about this perhaps on more of a whole school level. So as part of our whole school provision, we have a nurture group, we have an SDF, we have our mainstream classes. This is how learners move in and out and up and down those different levels of support. Okay, so there's no one right answer to this by any means. And I will kind of tie myself up in knots if I kind of try and go through every potential way that you could do this. But realistically, you will contextualize this journey to what it looks like within your setting. A couple of things I would say in terms of this is you will be asked to talk a little bit about that kind of response to intervention model. You can talk about universal provision and additional learning provision, for example. You might want to introduce, maybe there are different external partners that come in at different levels of support. And one key thing I think it's really useful to put into your poster somewhere is that this journey is kind of a two-way journey. So a learner can move from universal provision to more targeted support, but also they can move back down if that support has been effective and they no longer need it, for example. All right, so there's an awful lot to try and explain in terms of that one. It's going to be very contextualized to what it looks like in your setting, and perhaps the easiest thing to do is to show you where a couple of examples are later on to take a look at, so that you can see people have done it differently. All right, so this is a poster, 1,000-word equivalent. You're probably not going to get 1,000 words onto a poster. Part of the kind of marking is looking at the design of it, the effective use of colour and fonts and visuals, as well as the information that's on there. All right. And then the final bit, this one is probably the most straightforward. To some extent, this is a 1,000-word academic piece of writing, a critical evaluation of what we mean by effective leadership and management in ALN in a whole school kind of approach. So again, thinking about this within the context of your setting, as well as what's out there in the literature as well. So this one and the first core strand almost kind of bookend each other. So if that first core strand is looking at what's the role of the ALN Co, this final core strand is thinking about what are the kind of skills, knowledge, experiences that ALNCOs need to lead and manage effectively. So thinking about things like the ALNCO was meant to be at least on a par with a senior leadership team in school, if not a part of it, so that they had some kind of authority in asking people to do things. Is that in place in your setting? What are some of the barriers that the ALNCO might face? So does the ALNCO in your setting teach as well as do the ALNCO role? So there's those time commitments. What are some of the facilitators and supports that are there? So some of you might work in a really big secondary school where there is an assistant ALNCO who does some of the work as part of this. So this one is 1,000 words in length. Okay. So those are the first, that's the first bit of the assignment. So 4 core strands, 1 part of the assignment linked to each one. The good news is if you want to, and if you are organised, you can kind of work through the assignment in chunks rather than leaving it until the end. I know I am not that person and I would be doing it all at the end, but if you are that person and it helps to contextualise it as you go through, it works well in terms of that. Okay, so you've got a recorded PowerPoint presentation, you've got a self-evaluation, you've got an academic poster, and you've got a piece of academic writing about what do we mean by effective leadership and management of ALN, and what does it look like in your setting. All right, so I appreciate I've talked a lot at you there, but does that kind of sound sensible, doable, okay at this moment in time? Fab. Right, in terms of the marking criteria, then this one is quite straightforward realistically. So 4 core strands, all of them are going to part of the assignment. They're worth 20% each. And then this academic writing, use of referencing, the type of literature, the appropriateness of the literature that you've used, then 20%. Okay, so 20% of the mark is based on the presentation, 20% on the poster, and so on. What I would say in terms of that final bit, the clarity of exposition and accuracy, don't have any issues at all in terms of people's academic tone or writing or anything that was written in the previous assignment. What I would suggest here potentially is have a think about the number and type of references that you might be using to support, and we will think again about the kind of the appropriate correct citing and referencing of those. All right. There is no one right answer in terms of how many references you should have. As I've told you before, this is my 11th year working in unis now, and no one's ever given me a straight answer on that question. I don't know whether one exists. So my favourite piece of advice that I've been given is going to be the one that I've shared previously, which is if we think about an essay, if it's a 4,000 word essay, then as a rule of thumb, for every 100 words of the word count, think about 1 reference. So for a 4,000 word equivalent assignment, maybe we're looking at 40 different references. Okay, and potentially for this one, because there are 4 different sections and they're all different, finding a minimum of 10 separate references for each part is maybe a little bit easier to do than thinking about trying to find 40 things for a whole assignment. Okay, and in terms of references, again, can be legislation, can be policy documents. You can make links to documents from your setting. If it's appropriate, just anonymize them as you did previously. You can make links to ESTIN reports if those are appropriate. You can use any of the references that are on PLP if they're helpful. So there are things that are up there already in terms of leading and management and what's seen as being effective to save you having to try and find your own realistically, but you are more than welcome to kind of read wider and use your own as well. All right, so that's the marking criteria. The assignment itself then comes in on the 23rd of April. Okay, so same as you had with the last one, by a minute midnight on that Thursday. Same process as before, a single Word document, and like you did with the last one, put in your student number and the module code as a header, and then having that AI statement on there somewhere as well. Okay, so again, for this module, you're allowed to use AI to help you find information. You might use AI to help you design your poster, for example. You might use Copilot to design an image for you that goes onto your poster. All of that perfectly acceptable. If you do use it, you just need to put that statement in to say you have. And then what I would say, if you have used anything like ChatGPT or Copilot to produce something that you've put onto the poster, for example, we will need to cite and reference that as well. Okay, what you aren't allowed to do in terms of this is get Copilot to do any kind of the written work for you. So you can use it with any of the background bit. You know, hi Copilot, can you please find me some references that talk about effective leadership of ALN? Perfectly fine to use those kind of prompts. Just need that statement as you did before. And thinking about the assignments that came in previously, you know, there was a range of things people had done. So I've not used AI for anything in some cases. In some cases, I've used AI to help me proofread. Fine. In some cases, I've used AI to help me find appropriate literature. Perfectly fine. All right, so we just need to put that statement in to kind of cover you in terms of that. So, any questions before I stop sharing that and just show you a couple of other bits? This is the most exciting 45 minutes of your life, I know. But does that kind of seem okay as an initial starting point? Fab. Okay, so I'll stop sharing that there. Just mention a couple of other things. So hopefully now you can see PL, that's the wrong one. Hopefully you can see the right screen that I want to share, but I need to pick the right one. Bear with me a second. Okay, right, so hopefully now you can see a page that's on here from Canvas. So I'll pop this into student view because it looks slightly different to what it looks like when I go on. So as before, we've kind of got the home page. If you click on the course overview, for example, you've got a little bit on there about the aims and outcomes. There's another really exciting 15-minute video with my croaky voice talking through what I've just talked about in terms of the assignment, for example. And we've got down here a module handbook, a couple of documents, what's on Canvas and what's on PLP. Sometimes it's difficult to know what is where. And then there's that information. Here's the assignment brief. And then this is when it's due in. Okay, so we've got that there. Announcements, as we had in the last module, I will send messages out probably weekly through the announcement. Now, hopefully those come through automatically to your student email address. So these will just be kind of reminder announcements. So this is the aim for this week, for example. In terms of the modules, I will go through and kind of populate these as we go through each week. Otherwise, it's easy to kind of get overwhelmed to go, well, there's 10 links on there. I don't know which one I should be looking at. So basically, as we've done before, I will pop up one of these overview and to-do lists weekly. So it could be a message, you know, Dawn, this week, the aim is to read through Course Strand 1 and Pebblepad. But equally, if we've got a session, I will pop the links up to it there. There's that Padlet that I mentioned earlier on. So again, there's another way potentially of just saying hello to each other and maybe sharing details to add each other to that WhatsApp group. And then I've got an assignment guidance page on here. I'll just move you over the other side. So done a bit more of a recap about what we've just gone through. There's the link to the Harvard referencing guidelines. I find that really useful to follow. It doesn't stick in my head as to how it should look either, I've got to be honest. And then there's a little bit more information about what you need to do for each part of the assignment, for example. I haven't populated this next bit yet because I will ask people as a group to try and find the least worst times in terms of having our optional drop-in sessions again. Again, we're meant to have 2 for this module. The aim is I'm going to try and put on 8 like we did with the last module. So potentially these will be weekly. So it might be a Tuesday one week, it might be a Thursday the next week. So hopefully there will be at least one of these that works okay to attend. During Easter, I will also put some sessions on then in the second week of the Easter holidays. Again, you're on your holidays, there's no expectation that you have to turn up, but I also don't want you to not be supported if you need it, if you're doing stuff over Easter either. So that information is on there. I'm just going to move you back over. Haven't had much of the information through for the national conference as yet, but there's the timetable with the link onto it. For example, that's also on Canvas, and like with the other one, I'll put the PowerPoint and recordings and stuff up on there when they're available as well. So just wanted to mention that in terms of Canvas. So I'll stop sharing that bit. And then in terms of PLP, you may already have been on here, but if you haven't, just in case, we've got then the same kind of workbook looking thing as before. So the 4 core strands, the different sub-strands on each one. Where possible, I've put these hyperlinks into things that might be useful. So these are quite useful. For example, you may have seen these, the kind of the ESTIN evaluations of the ALN transformation program, or what's worked and what's needs to be further developed. So the information for the 4 core strands is up on there already. I'm going to say famous last words, these hyperlinks should work. Okay, they did work when I checked them last week. However, it's surprising how often Welsh Government update their links and they break. So as you go through, if you find some of these links don't work for you, please let me know. Little bit of information again in terms of the assignment guidance. Now it's basically what I've put up on Canvas, but this is quite a useful document, the assignment support checklist, when we get a little bit further through the module, which will basically tell you to know what on this particular day or this particular part of Canvas, this is where we talked about the presentation. So that's quite helpful to kind of refer back to. At the bottom of this page, and as we had before, we've got some previous student submissions. I can't guarantee that the presentations still work in these. So when students gave us permission to share them, they did give us permission to share the links for presentations. However, in some cases, those links might now have expired, and we don't have any control in terms of reactivating those, I'm afraid. So when you go through, hopefully you'll see that the 4 parts of the assignment are on there. But if there is 1 or 2 where the presentation link, for example, doesn't work, I'm afraid I can't fix that. However, we are in the process of asking other people for examples that they'd be happy to share to update as well. So the information about the assignment is there with some examples. The resources, so for the national conferences as they were in the last module. So I've put the bits up ready, but I haven't had the information to share specifically, but you'll see the timetable and link is there again. And if you happen to have free time and you want to kind of follow this up, what I've put up on here is an archive of basically the last 3 years worth of national conference sessions. Now you might want to look at it, equally you might not want to. Okay, so there's no expectation that you have to, but realistically, all the resources from the last couple of years are up on there, for example. So what you might be interested in is following up on the Ask the Expert sessions. So those practitioners or people who've come in elsewhere to talk to us about something. Okay, so no expectation that you need to or have to look at any of that archive stuff, but it's there just in case you want to. And as I said, potentially the Ask the Expert bit might be interesting or more interesting than the other bits. All right, so I will stop sharing that there. I'm conscious of the time, and I've talked at you now for 50 minutes. So does anyone have any questions or comments or worries or anything at the minute? Does that kind of seem okay as a starting point? There's a lot to take on board in terms of that. But pretty much, you know, when the national conferences are coming up really, really quickly, and hopefully you've got a bit of an idea about what the assignment looks like. What I would say on the conference on Saturday in that introduction session, Rhiannon's going to spend a bit of time, I think, talking about the presentation and the self-evaluation aspect of it. And then we'll pick up the other two parts of it in the conference in March as well. Okay, so there will be a bit more support and guidance in terms of those bits. And again, when we look to meet up for our optional drop-in sessions, the aim will be as before, really. Come along if you've got any questions, anything that you want to share. I'm not allowed to give anyone any written feedback, unfortunately, but if you're happy to share something on screen, then myself and whoever else is here, it's quite nice to have that peer support. And do you know what? I just wanted to check it makes sense when someone else looks at it. So hopefully we can kind of put those sessions on and get some engagement. As you know, as you mentioned earlier on, Dawn, it's quite nice sometimes just to have those check-ins with other people, and the WhatsApp group I think you'll find really helpful in terms of keeping in touch in terms of that. So I will stop talking in a second, so I'll hand it back over to you. Any questions, any concerns, any worries? Other than what the hell did I sign up for this for?
No, I think I'm okay.
And that's good. So other than that then, diolch yn fawr yn dod. Thank you for coming this evening. It's lovely to see you again. Any questions between now and Saturday, please just get in touch. As I said, I've shared the link on Canvas and PLP for Saturday. I'll probably email it to you all on Thursday or Friday as well, so that you've got it in multiple cases. And then it's a case of just turn up on Saturday. As I said, it'd be a little bit unfair to expect you to have read course strand 1 and 2 on Pebble Pad by Saturday. So don't worry if you haven't had a chance to look at anything. It'll follow the same format as before. And then the only other thing I would say on Saturday, did any of you have any issues in joining previously, and in particular going into things like breakout rooms, or were you all okay? I know there were some people who were kind of stuck. They were in the meeting, but they weren't showing up on the list, and people couldn't move them into breakout rooms. So I think, depending upon what browser you joined on and maybe what account you come through, that was impacting some people. So whether they'd come in through Chrome or Edge, or whether they'd come in on their personal email compared to their student or work-based email, did have an impact. So if you didn't have any issues last time, then basically just do again what you did before. So that obviously worked. There we go, 4:30. I'll stop talking at you. Thank you for coming. Feel free to leave whenever you are ready. I won't be offended if you disappear. Anything you want to ask, please feel free to stay, and I'll stop the recording if you don't want those questions recorded. Other than that, look forward to catching up with you on Saturday, working with you again on the module. And then, as you know, your feedback comes back on Thursday. If there's any questions or anything you want to go over with that, once it's come back, please let me know, and then we can kind of meet up. But I don't think there was any issues or concerns in terms of anything that people had submitted realistically. Okay, so I'll stop recording at this point anyway.